Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Weird Walk Home. I'm Tillie Treadwell, and I am joined this evening by my dear friend and publisher, my favorite ancient aliens friend of all times, Tim R. Swartz. Tim, what have you been up to?
Hi, Tilly. Well, right now we've been sweating a lot. Here in the Midwest, as you know, I mean, we're not alone. I mean, the entire Midwest and the Eastern, I mean, even where you are, I mean, we've been under that high pressure dome, which has raised the temperatures to about 500 degrees, it seems like. So, and then, this time last week, we were flooding. we had uh, we had trains of rain and thunderstorms that just engulfed us. I was ready to build an ark, and of course, we were that was the weekend when we were traveling down to Paintsville, Kentucky for their first ever Paintsville
Oh,
Paracon. So yeah, that was a fun drive.
oh, I could only
But
imagine.
other than that, yeah, we survived, and I was able to be here today to talk with you.
Ooh, yeah, so if I remember properly, you were speaking at that Paracon, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Why don't you tell us, brief us on what you were talking about?
Well, basically, what we're going to be talking about today, our just really recently released book called the Persistence of Ghosts.
Mhm.
So, naturally, I'm big right now into pushing it and trying to encourage people to get themselves a copy, either as a print or ebook, or even an audiobook. It's now available as an audiobook, so you can if you've got like a long commute or something, it's a great book to listen to while you're stuck in traffic someplace. But yeah, I mean, my talk was around this book. You only have 45 minutes, so you just really have to hit
Sure.
the bullet points. And that's what I explained to people. I said, what I'm telling you today is really a summary of what's in the book. And if you read the book, you'll see all of the information that leads to our various hypotheses that we come up with in the book, the historical aspects, the centuries of research by other dedicated paranormal explorers. I mean, and what what's in the book and what I'm talking about, what you talk about. I mean, it's nothing new. I mean, people have been talking about this for a long, long time, but I think that I can't say that the various hypotheses that we've come up with is that earth-shatteringly new, but I think that we're presenting it in a way that that modern readers and viewers and listeners may have a better understanding of the whole paranormal phenomena, and hopefully give them a fresh perspective on what could be going on.
I completely agree. And I actually have a copy of the book with me right here.
Yay!
What all the scenes I know. Tim was kind. He sent me a nice little collection of books to put in my shop. I run intermediary.art if anyone is interested. So you're most welcome to pop over there at some point and grab yourself an autographed copy. But this is not, it is not really a beginner book, as you can see. This is a nice thick volume. It
Yep.
appears that we all had a lot to say. And while I agree that most of it is technically more classic information, I was able to chime in and find ways to fit in with all of the wonderful other authors with my brand new and novel takes. And somehow the entire book just makes sense. And I think that that's what I love most about our team, Tim, is that we all come from drastically different takes, from classic fairy mythology to Egyptian and Lithuanian mythology, and then modern day accounts. There's just so very much to cover, including even stories of our own near death experiences, which that's something that I wrote about in one of my own chapters, which deals with the concept of unfinished business. What about you, Tim? Do you have any thoughts on unfinished business and death?
Well, that's one of the, I think, special aspects of our research with this book is that for the most part, um, and this is a concept that a lot of people have, I think, are have trouble wrapping their head around. The unfinished business actually occurs with a fragmented part of us because our core personality, our core consciousness, our soul, however you want to look at it, that part of us that we think survives after death, that that moves on. That moves on fairly quickly. It doesn't remain behind. No, I mean, and you have to remember, there's always a nothing is black and white. There's always a middle ground when it comes to things like this. But for the most part, when you pass on, that part of you goes. It goes on to the afterlife, heaven, whatever you want to call it. But there are parts of us, there are other souls, and I'm going to keep using that word because that's just the easiest words to use, that don't ascend because they are part of this physical reality. They these souls are the parts that govern our emotions, our ego, things like that. Um, they don't ascend because they're not supposed to. They remain here in this three-dimensional reality until their energy eventually either dissipates or, and I didn't put this in the book because this didn't occur to me till later, but possibly they go on to feed new life. All
Hmm.
right. Because there is a difference. There is a difference between that universal consciousness that we call the ultimate soul, and then the physical souls, the emotional souls. These are the ones that are concerned with unfinished business, physical pleasures, uh, 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 I'm trying to come up with kind of delicate ways, to put,
That's okay.
addictions, things like that. All right, trauma, pain.
Yeah.
So, if you have somebody who has had a violent death, or a person who is very much concerned about physical pleasures or physical pains, things like that, those are the parts of us that can remain behind and haunt. All right. If you go and look at more than centuries, millennia of cultural beliefs all around the world. And I use this as an example about burial rituals. All right. If you have been brought up to believe that you need to be buried in a proper way, and then if that doesn't happen, those parts of you that remain behind are obsessed with that, and then they haunt. All right. Same way with if your grave is disturbed. If those little fragments of your consciousness are still hanging around and your body is disturbed, they'll haunt. All right. And it's, and if you've noticed, hauntings tend to occur if people are saying, well, this haunting is because of such and such person. Most of the time, that such and such person had the type of personality that I've been referring to, if you know what I mean.
I
All right.
do. I
Yeah.
do.
Right. Um, and again, like I said, with somebody who is like an obsessive personality, hooked on physical pleasures, hooked on physical, pains, had a traumatic lifestyle. That's one of the things that I point out quite a bit in the book myself, is
Yeah.
that trauma and pain can persist beyond the body, right?
Mhm.
And it's and a lot of people, have said to me about this. He goes, "Oh, well, that's a horrible thing. This is horrible," and I'm just like, it's it's not your. And again, it can be hard sometimes to express, but it's not your core consciousness. It's not your your core spirit or soul that has gone on. That's gone on to whatever. It's gone through the tunnel. Instead, everybody leaves behind fragments of themselves. It would be like saying that it's horrible that your dreams are unhappy. It's just the way it is. For most people, it doesn't matter. These fragments dissipate, go on to feed new life just like they're supposed to, and they don't haunt. It's under certain circumstances, I think, that they remain behind to haunt. And it's why I've started telling people, um, and if you've noticed, a lot of times when people try to get rid of a haunting, burn sage, or get the crystals out, or say prayers, or things like that, most of the time it's not effective. It doesn't work. Sometimes it does, but not. I don't think it's effective for the reasons that we think that it's effective. All right. You're not sending the spirit back, into the light, because it's not supposed to go into the light. You may get it out of your house, but chances are it'll just come back if you are providing it the energy to come back to.
Yes, I
All
agree.
right. Yes. Um, if it's like my late friend Paul Eno talked about, um,
Mhm.
with poltergeist, because he felt that poltergeist weren't ghosts and spirits like we think of traditionally. He felt that they were parasites from other realities, uh, that feed off of our negative emotions and will create haunting environments that are scary, because that elicits the type of energy that these things feed off of.
Mhm.
To a certain extent, the fragmented consciousness of deceased humans can can do the same thing, can feed off of negative emotions, can feed off of happy emotions. Most of the time, it's negative emotions, because that's the reason these fragmented personalities are haunting in the first place because they have negative emotions, and they have there's not a lot of consciousness left in the way that we think of as consciousness. They're snippets of memories. They're and you have to remember that in this state, it's timeless. All right. So not only are they consciousness, bits of consciousness without a lot of memory, but they're also unstuck in time. We're stuck in time. All right. We're stuck in this 3D reality. While these fragments of consciousness can go, back and forth. I mean, the time is meaningless to them. And that adds to the confusion. All right. So if you are in an environment, say like a house that is that you think is haunted, um, you can have a house where the previous occupants never had any kind of problems at all right, because they did not have that ability to feed into that. New people come in, and whether they realize it or not, may have that ability. Maybe it's a psychic ability. I don't know. I'm not, I'm not going to go and give you um, explanations on why this is happening because I don't know. Again,
Sure,
these are hypotheses and theories.
sure.
And so, you get new people coming in, and especially if these new people come in, say a house, and start changing things, painting the walls, tearing, tearing down, tearing up the floors, things like that. That almost always activates some kind
Yes.
of discarnate types of energies. And if somebody in the house has that shine, so to speak, that feeds into it, you
It
know,
does.
and then it just kind of becomes a reoccurring pattern. All right.
Yes. Yes.
Because then these fragments of personalities that we call ghosts will do things, and then people will get scared, and then these fragments will power up a little bit more and do more, and then it just keeps going around and around and around. And
Yeah.
then they may call in a priest, or something like that, to try to exorcise the place, and that doesn't. And they try all these different things that they think are supposed to work, but they never really do. Not really. And instead, it just feeds energy into these things that just continue, just. And I'm trying to think of a phrase. I can't think of it right now. At 3 o'clock this morning, I'll think of it, Tilly. But anyway, it's like a round robin feedback. If
I
you know
don't,
what that means, um, you feed into it, it responds, and then you respond and feed into it, and it just goes round and round and round
yes.
and round and round. That,
Yes.
yeah, until eventually something breaks. The people either move out or they calm down and accept the situation, which then takes the energy away, and then it fades away.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would agree with I think about 95% of what you've said, and the rest is just subjective. So I could be wrong equally as
Well,
easily.
and you have to understand also that sometimes with these cases, you may not be dealing with what we would think of as traditionally a human spirit. You
Mhm.
know, there's all kinds of non-human entities out there, and even though we tend to lump everything together as ghosts and spirits, or monsters or cryptids or things like that, and even though that they may appear to us as spirits, that's probably not really the right word for them. But
And
we
you know what,
pull.
friends? I write about that in The Persistence of Ghosts because
Yeah, that's right.
in case anyone is new here, I am an esoteric exorcist. And I used to work with the Catholic Church, but I've gone rogue now, and that's a whole story for another day. But I've had a few cases of seemingly unfinished business with human spirits who had recently passed on, but didn't want to move on. And then there was one in particular that, of course, I don't think I have the ultimate answer, but it does seem to me that this haunting was actually a mimic posing as the recently deceased. And I wrote about that in the chapter Copycat. So you're going to want to grab this volume because it'll spill all the tea for you. No drop left untouched there. But Tim, I do agree largely with what you are saying because it seemed to me that this is not a black and white issue. When I was working these cases, it seemed that unfinished business really was anchoring the ego part of that person's soul to this plane. And it was incredibly stressful and overwhelming and complex working these types of cases. I wouldn't go back to it for $1 million, maybe 10 million, but it would really depend on the details. It was such messy, deep, painful, complicated casework. There was, the cheating and the betrayals and the jealousy, just lots of feelings involved, lots of typically betrayal and whatnot between family members. And the only way it seemed to really help these people move on both sides of the veil was to act as a mediator of sorts. And until that was able to be fulfilled, they were having a lot of very personalized activity there in the home. And some of it could, to the untrained eye, seem to be quote unquote demonic or non human. But what I found really interesting about that is that within the two cases that I am very sure were human, they started off about 12 to 24 hours after the person passed away. The people had passed away there in the house at the time. And when the activity began, these spirits or ghosts, whatever you'd like to call them, excuse me, they started off by attacking personal items there in the home, personal items that were unique to the family. Tearing down family photos was a really big one. So I'm certain you guys are all really familiar with the trope of like a demon tearing the family picture off of the wall and then it breaks the glass on the ground. That's precisely what was happening there as just the entry act, and then it would ramp up from there. But it always would be incredibly personal, hurtful types of hauntings. And I found that this is exactly where it tends to differ between a non-human interaction and then some type of family trauma event like unfinished business. And I write about that at quite length within the book. So please do check that out. Please support us and purchase that if and when you can. But it seems to me that the unfinished business is kind of what is haunting at humanity through all of time. Because even back seemingly millennia ago, there were visitors here who gifted humanity with, for example, the Book of the Dead. And there are a few different versions of that book. There's the Egyptian one, and then there's the Tibetan one, and they have a lot of overlapping ideas and ideals. What do you think about that?
Oh, absolutely. Well, you talk about, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, and there's the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and other cultures, and all of them talk about how we are more than just one inside of us. There's, and again, I go back to using the word soul because we really don't have a good word for it, but that there's more than one soul inside of us, and but I just real quick, Tilly, I wanted to go back and you were talking about demons, and
Mm,
anymore, I've gotten to the point where I definitely try to steer people away from this whole "oh, there's a demon in my house" type, and that has become so popular right now that I really
yeah,
think that it's not helpful in
yeah,
the situations, and I blame really reality television with these ghost hunting shows, because of their attempt to draw in viewers and sell more advertising. It's a lot sexier to say that there is an evil demon in these people's houses, and and while there definitely are malevolent spirits, whatever you want to call them, out there, all right, calling them demons is not helpful, because there are a lot of them that are kind of formless, nebulous, and will take on whatever guise that you think that they are.
hmm
Right?
yeah,
So, and I've seen this with poltergeist cases. It
yeah,
starts out with just, with just a normal poltergeist, with furniture moving around, things being thrown, stuff breaking, stuff like that. Somebody comes in and says, "Oh, you have a demon." And then the next thing you know, it starts playing that role. You
yes.
know,
I
it's
talk
a
about that as well.
yeah. It steals the Bibles. If you have crosses on the wall, it hangs them upside
Mhm.
down. It does all the stuff that you would traditionally, assume a demon is doing. If instead somebody came in and said, "Oh, this isn't a poltergeist. These are invisible aliens from Alpha Centauri," then it's going to start doing
Yes.
things to uh, 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 to give you that confirmation bias. All right, it's
Mhm.
going to start, leaving little notes around
Yeah.
in like a alien language. You're going to start seeing
Yeah.
UFOs in the sky. That's the way this phenomenon works. It's very plastic. It's very malleable, based on your thoughts and opinions. It loves to play these kinds of games. That's one of the things that I pointed out, is that you know, and again, there's no telling a lot of times if you are dealing with the fragments of human consciousness, or maybe some other kind of non-human entity. Either way, all of them love to be mischievous. you know?
It's so it's so interesting to me that you're talking about this right now, and at least on my end, you're now frozen. Can you still hear me?
Oh gosh, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. It's very interesting because as you were talking about that,
That's an interesting
yeah,
expression on my face.
you see it. Yes, you are
Yeah.
frozen. And I started getting a lot of electrical interference when you're talking about that. Oh, he's gone.
Can you still hear me?
I can hear you, but now I can't see you at all.
Let me see if I can get my camera working
Yeah.
again.
And friends, this kind of thing happens in my life all the time. In case anyone's not aware, I live a pretty enchanted life. I like to say that in my house there are 999 happy haunts, and of course that's me included. So usually when we start talking about these deeper things, my friends on the other side like to chime in one way or another. Sometimes we'll get shadow people on camera. Sometimes there are orbs, electronic interferences, EVPs. It really just depends what kind of a mood they're in. So it seems that tonight is no different.
You
How's
know,
it going there, Tim?
it's funny because there we go. Can you see me?
Perfect. Yes,
There you
and
go.
you're not frozen.
Nope. No.
Oh, and you're frozen again.
Oh no, I'm not.
Oh, no. Okay.
It's funny because I thought I heard a third person come into the conversation briefly just before my camera froze. I
It's
don't
very
know it.
interesting that you say that. Yes, there was. There was someone beside me speaking at the time, and they're chittering in my ear, but I didn't want to interrupt you. But yes, you heard them. They're
Oh,
here with
okay,
us now.
okay, all right.
Um,
So
were you able to pick up anything? Were you able to hear any particular words?
no, no, I just heard like the just somebody talking, just briefly.
Gotcha, gotcha. Well, hopefully, if there are any audio engineers out there in the audience, if you can dissect the audio, we'd love to hear what maybe you come up with because this is very common and they've been pretty active lately, to be honest. Lately, anyways. But yeah, they were asking me. They're here on my right side, and there's one in particular that was asking me to make sure to talk about how a lot of these non-human peoples who are presenting in the homes, there are some that are classically you could call demons, but that it's not a very intelligent or accurate title. Um, because they were saying that a lot of the religion stuff is actually a multi-species grift. And the happy haunts that I live with, um, very low in ego content and very low in emotional content. So they tend to be super objective, even quote unquote coldly so. And they say that religion, if you look at the etymology behind the word religion, it has to do with bondage and with chains. And that could even be interpreted as a type of war. This is part of why I wound up leaving the Catholic Church as one of their associates because unfortunately, after working all of these cases and interacting with the non-human peoples and beings and the human families and whatnot, I came to realize that more often than not, humanity is quite the bad guy here. If we want to talk about cold morals there, and a lot of these non-human beings and peoples, they're not there just to be mean. They're there, like you said, to feed a lot of the time and they're there to forward a storyline, their characters and a story arc, essentially. So, the calmer that someone can be when someone starts to have activity, the less they can trend towards trying to film and exploit it, the better that person is going to have as far as their outcomes fare. And the Catholic Church really didn't like that I had to say that, and I can understand why. They genuinely, a lot of these people believe that they are trying to save souls, and they're faithful in their religion. I don't blame them one bit. It's just that what I've experienced and seen all my life is quite different, and I think that that's okay. It's just that I think the mentality of the human variable or the incarnate variable will determine the outcome because at least in my experience, as you were discussing, a lot of non-human peoples are mirrors towards human beings.
All
I
right.
completely agree. Jacques Vallée had started to talk about this as well, or write about this in some of his books. And this has been a constant in every single case that I have ever worked and in almost all of my own non-human encounters. And I'm usually pretty honest. In my brand new book, Enchanted Objects, I talk about the relationships that I have in my enchanted house. I've always been able to see spirits and non-human beings and things like that. I have a different eye structure. I can hear them very easily. I have a different ear structure, and some you may not know. I work with genetic specialists and lots of different types of researchers because of these differences. And I think that it's really important, just based on everything that I've ever seen, for the human element to do however, or to do whatever they can to remain calm, objective, and to not label a non-human presence as good, as evil, as an angel, an alien, a fairy, etc., because these non-human peoples, being so much lower in the ego content, the clinical ego content, than human beings, they have many different faces and personalities, and they develop even more over time. Those develop even more deeply. It's like a kaleidoscope, is what I like to say. You look into it, and there's maybe, one central piece. You could say that it's the soul spark, and then they got lots of different masks and soul fragments that branch outwards, and they can access these almost simultaneously at any given point to create themselves brand new in the moment. And human beings typically cannot even begin to do that. So they, from what I have known and understood and experienced, they love to interact with human beings for food. Some people call that loosh. We can talk about that a little bit more, of course, but essentially there are some non-human beings, non-human peoples, in my experience and understanding, who will directly feed off of the human aura, and then there are ones that are less harmful towards human beings, and they'll feed off of emotional energy and smoke and atmosphere. The Bible talks about this, offerings to the gods and whatnot.
Mhm.
And they're not draining the human being that way. So there's that. But then they also sometimes, from my experience, like to come and learn from human beings. So they'll interact with human beings to one extent or another, because there are lessons offered there karmically that can't be achieved in any other way. And then, of course, I believe that there are some non-human people who have incarnated into our society here in order to have a very unique experience and or to assist or harm humankind or tempt humankind. It really just depends on the person and the agenda. But it's a massive grayscale there. And I find that a lot of the so-called hauntings that I've investigated, where allegedly it was a human person, I don't suspect that a lot of the time it was a human person. I really believe that it was some non-human person who was forwarding a storyline for or towards the family, or who was there to feed. And sometimes the families would catch on and say, "Oh yeah, this isn't human. This is some other kind of thing." They'd usually call it a demon, because that's common in Catholicism.
Right.
But then, we did seem to have a few of the human cases, but they seemed to be an exquisitely minuscule part of the body of casework that I had participated in.
Yeah, I would say that when you have cases that seem to be very energetic, more than likely you're not dealing with um, left behind, human consciousness. That you're dealing with something else, because you look at a lot of these cases where there has to be a lot of energy expended in order to accomplish the types of things that they're able to do.
Mhm.
Apports. Now, little things, jewelry, coins, things like that. That probably, I mean, that probably takes a lot of energy, but not that much. But when you have things like furniture disappearing,
Yeah.
moving from one room to the other, stuff like that. Um, when it gets to the point where they're actually talking and writing letters and doing things like that, you're probably not dealing with, your the what's left over from your your dead grandma Sophia. It may try to convince you that's who it is, but it probably isn't. I don't think that for the most part, these fragments of consciousness that are left behind after we die have that much energy available to them. They have some, but not that much. And as uh, the jinn is a perfect example of these types of non-human entities, that they're not spirits, not spirits that we traditionally think of as spirits. Uh, uh, they have that kind of energy, and of course, that's just the name that one aspect of our various civilizations have given these beings, and there's all kinds of different names throughout the centuries and throughout the cultures. But I think that we're dealing with very similar types of non-human entities. If we have the ability, and some people do, we all of us have the ability to see all of the different things around us, we probably couldn't handle it. We probably evolved away from that ability, just so we could survive, in this reality. I mean, it's hard enough. You think about it. It was hard enough not to be eaten by that saber-toothed tiger hiding in the bushes. But then to also have the ability to see all of the different non-human things that surround us all the time. There are probably people who do, and we call them crazy or schizophrenic or various other types of mental diseases. And instead of a mental disease, they just have the ability to see what's really going on around us. I don't want
Sure.
that ability.
Right, right. And see, so this is where it gets into my own research with the laboratories and the quantum scientists. I mean, you and I talk about things off the record. I share a lot with you about what I do that I can't share publicly yet. But what I can say at this point in time is that part of my laboratory journey has to do with the brain, the eyes, and the ears, as well as psychology. So, friends, I did release on my Facebook and at a talk that we did actually this past January at a convention about brain waves and history and whatnot. It's been revealed that my brain is technically sleeping about 98% of the time. So my brain constantly is running in delta, theta, and alpha simultaneously. I have very little beta brainwave activity. I only enter any kind of beta when I'm stressed. And that tends to be a very particular type of stress. It's, social stress for me because I'm also, level 1 autistic. So it has to get to a certain level for my brain to register stress and then be reflecting beta brain waves. So what scientists have done, what Tim was saying, is that the average person would not be able to handle the psychological impact of seeing, all the non-human beings and peoples around them. And that's precisely now what some of the people that I work with behind the scenes are saying. They're looking at my brain waves, my eye structure, my ear structure, and how I respond to human social situations versus paranormal events and whatnot. And what they have come to realize is that my brain structure, my brain waves, my eyes, all of it, it's a complete package. It's a genetic package essentially. And the readings that they get from me, for example, compared to my husband Artemis, and then compared to other strangers, wildly different. And so now it's more solidifying the theory that the human brain is not necessarily a wide receiver. It's a narrow band receiver. And the main function of the human brain is actually to filter out. I posted a new article that was published actually by some of the people's associates that I work with. And in this article, they talk about how the brain is now being more labeled as a filter officially instead of as a wide receiver. And I think that this is a big jump in human genetic understanding and in human psychology. So I agree with you, and I just wanted to expand on that a bit. But in asking about the jinn, we have a friend here in the chat, hello, asking about the jinn. Um, I believe that the jinn have many different temperaments for the most part, and of course, different types of spiritualities and whatnot. And I have worked with some non-human beings, and there are some that reside here in my home that claim to be jinn, or at minimum, they identify as being jinn. And I love them dearly with all my heart, the way that I love humankind and the way that I love the people who claim to be, the fairies, the angels, even the demons, quote unquote, the daemons. I love everyone equally and faithfully. So I have an understanding that they are all varied in temperament, in agenda, and they often have the extremely low to no ego content, depending upon the bloodline. This is what I'm told, anyways. And so some of them are here to help humanity. Some of them can't stand humanity. Some of them pick and choose certain individuals to assist. But with my neurodivergence and my different brain chemistry, my different eye structure, my different ear structure, I'm with them all day, every day. And I love that. I feel very safe and very happy living with my whole house of hauntings. And that's really what I have to say about it. I personally, I don't judge based on any religion or anything like that, because there are many sides to every single story. And I just feel like I'm here mostly to try to spread love and encouragement. So that's mostly what I do my very best to focus on. So I do hope that that helps answer your question, my dear.
Yeah, according to Islamic traditions, the jinn are pretty much like us. I mean, you have those that are religious, you have
Mhm.
those that aren't, you
Mhm.
have those that like humans, those who don't, and then those who just could care less one way or the other. People tend to to think that like all jinn are bad, or and are out to get us and to cause problems,
Mhm.
and that's not the case.
No.
Just like that would be like saying that all people are bad. Which isn't the case. I mean, it's like we were saying, there's a wide gambit of different personalities and
Yes.
different kinds of likes and dislikes and desires, and you just you can't judge an entire um, species of being based on just a few here or there.
Yep.
So, and I know that in a lot of countries, when you have poltergeist cases, it's usually considered, rather than being a spirit like here in the West, that you're dealing with the jinn. You're dealing
Mhm.
with, an individual who's having fun or has some nefarious plans, or or whatever. And then, to me, see, that's one of the interesting things about the different cultures and the different time periods, is the various interpretations for the really the same kind of phenomena that has occurred and reoccurred since we probably fell out of the trees. And I dare say that our cousin species, say like the Neanderthals, had their own ghosts and spirits and jinn, or what have you, that they dealt with as well. Were they the same ones that we deal with? It's hard to say. But I would say that as long as there has been conscious beings on this planet in the material realm of existence, they have had their ghosts and spirits and hauntings.
Yes, absolutely. And in the chat, I'm seeing a lot of talk of labels like good and evil or good and bad. I would like to say directly that I do not believe personally in any such thing as good or evil. I see it all as being very relative. So, for example, from my perspective, I might see one thing as painful or harmful towards me. And, I could then, in theory, easily label that as being objectively evil, but that's not true. It's just opinion, it's just subjective labeling. And so I always encourage people also to stay away from such labels if you want to work with any type of non human person, because non-human people tend to be extremely contractual and literal. So you can kind of think of like an autistic person, maybe on steroids, for example. They will indeed be reflecting back to you what you give them. And if you label them, if you judge them, they will in turn typically tend to do the very same towards you. And this has gone for every type of non-human person that I've ever encountered, that I've ever worked with. So that's just another piece of perhaps wisdom that I would like to offer. Even in the Bible it says, "Judge not, lest ye be judged." And so this is one of the key takeaways that I've always had from all of these encounters. So Deb Forel, I hope I said that right. She is a lovely fan and Facebook friend of mine. She has a question here, and I think it's a great one. I never ask who it is, should I? So, from an esoteric exorcist point of view, I would say that all depends on you, my love. So, what do you want to accomplish in the situation? If a non-human being potentially is approaching you wherever, what do you want to get out of that type of encounter? Do you want the encounter to wind down and go away? Do you want it to continue? Do you want it to ramp up? Do you want it to have a certain flavor? If you do, that's when you would start to have more direct engagement. I typically, however, do not recommend this for most human friends, because it's very easy to get lost in a dangerous situation, especially if you're entering into language contracts, such as asking a direct question. So, Tim, do you remember Ghostbusters, right? The original movie?
Oh, sure. Of course.
Yeah, wasn't that a banger of a film? They don't make it like that anymore. But there towards the end, you remember the big Stay Puft Marshmallow dude, right? Okay,
Right.
so yes, so you remember right before that guy appeared, there was an interaction, and they were instructed not to think of anything else that would become the adversary that they would have to face.
Yeah.
This is how I kind of see it, but in a more domestic sense. So if you are asking for some type of label from them, typically speaking, unless your heart is very pure by their standards, they're not going to give you a direct answer. Instead, typically, they will give you an answer that they feel fits your karma, fits your heart. And that includes all of the things that you don't say out loud, but that your energy projects outwards, So they are masters at aura reading in my experience. And so they will mirror back to you whatever it is you're subconsciously expecting, and sometimes even consciously expecting. So if you don't want to engage in that type of labeled contract, what I would suggest instead is to considering saying something more like, "Oh, hello, I acknowledge you. I would not like to participate, and I'm going to go about my way now." This peacefully acknowledges that they're there, and then you're kindly excusing yourself from the situation, because the truth is that you don't know who this is, and you don't know the psychology behind it. And of course, not that I'm an expert, I'm just sharing my own experience and potential wisdom here. So if you're not ready for that type of interaction, and you're not so certain of yourself and your subconscious that you'd enter into that type of deep contract, that would be my advice to you. And then they may respect you even more for that. You may gain yourself a kind and helpful household ally. You don't know who this is, but they may be someone there to genuinely look out for you. And then that humility is what deeply impresses them. I've had that experience myself in the past, and it's been very meaningful over the decades for me. Tim, I need to grab some water.
Mhm.
Please do feel most welcome to give us your thoughts on Deb's question.
Sure. Well, for me, I generally try to dissuade people from getting involved in this kind of stuff. For people who want to be ghost investigators, I tell them that unless you really feel like that you are ready for this and are emotionally able to deal with this kind of stuff, if you're psychically if you think you're psychically available, most people aren't, then I tell them don't do it, because it can become a trap. It really can. I mean, people always talk about how things can end up following you home, and that is a very real possibility if you are not emotionally and spiritually prepared to handle situations like this. The hitchhiker effect is what it's called, and I've seen a lot of people who think that it's all just going to be fun and excitement. Go to a haunted house and see what's going on, and then the next thing you know, it's followed you home. Something's followed you home, and is pulling the covers off of you at night and terrorizing the cats, and that's not something that most people want to get into. So when they ask me, oh, should I do this, should I get involved, and I'll tell them no, not until you think that you're ready, and even then you really have to think very carefully about what it is that you're trying to accomplish. If you're just into it for the thrills and giggles, definitely don't do it, because something's going to happen. You're going to get scared. And then that just feeds into that whole environment all over again.
I
So,
sure.
and like what Tillie was saying, you think back to your childhood when you and your friends would get the Ouija board out and try to call up Napoleon or whoever, and then you get something that says that they are Napoleon, and then after a while starts cussing you out. You know,
Yeah.
I always say, when you do something like that, it's pretty much like picking up your telephone, dialing a number at random, and expecting Napoleon to be on the other end. It's not going to
Yeah.
happen. You're going to get something else that probably, and going back to what we were talking about earlier, there's these fragments of consciousness and personality that are still floating around, and if they are, they're usually from people that you wouldn't want to deal with if when they were alive. All right.
Yes.
And as long as these fragments are able to bring in the energy enough to do things, then it's going to happen, and it's not going to be a pleasant experience. And if you want to avoid that, don't get involved.
I'm totally with you. I used to work with a team when I was with the Catholic Church, and a lot of them would have some pretty bad experiences. Um,
Yeah.
there's only one. Yeah, there's only really one investigator that I would say, even dare to endorse. His name is Ross Allison. At some point, he and I need to do a show together. We were meant to do it, over the winter. We just both got so busy, and he travels all the time. Um, But he says that the basis of every one of his investigations is respect for whoever or whatever is there, and that he has never come away from even the most daunting investigations with any type of trouble. And that does line up with exactly what I'm talking about and with what I've always experienced myself. And then meanwhile, oh my goodness, I think her name was Michelle or Dawn or something like that. Oh goodness, please forgive me. It's been a long time since I've heard her show. But this young woman was on Coast to Coast sometime over the last year. And she was speaking about how she got involved with paranormal investigating and how she approached it with a very rather arrogant attitude, and that she had really a ton of relationship problems that she now owns up to. She said, I was the problem. And then she had an addiction to smoking, and I think there was one other addiction, if I'm remembering properly. But she said that there was one case in particular where she showed up and her ego just could not let it go. Tim, do you know who I'm talking about?
Not offhand, no.
Okay.
But
Um,
I've heard the same kind of story that you're told though from other people. Excuse me.
yes. So she was saying that she just couldn't let it go, that she quote unquote had to solve the mystery. She had to help the person move on, or scare the demon away, whatever it was. I can't quite recall. But she kept coming back, and she just kept, testing that boundary. And people were telling her, like, hey, maybe you should back off. You're not handling this according to protocol, and, yada, yada, yada. Well, eventually this non-human being followed her home and started to encroach on her aura, on her energy field. And then she said that she was just at such a low point, and she was just so invested in that mystery that she outright consented to taking in this non-human person, knowing that it was not a good situation. And so she was on Coast to Coast talking about how she's still in a lot of pain and in a lot of turmoil, and she's going through all of these different things, but that she is in some ways just now so accustomed to sharing her body, her mind, her life with this other non-human entity that she can't imagine letting it go. And it ruined her I think it was her marriage, but it ruined her main relationship. She had tons of health issues, and she really needs help. But people were offering to hook her up with help, and she was just saying, like, I can't imagine getting free from this. I just want to warn everyone not to do what I did, to approach these things with humility and whatnot.
Right.
And that's my message at the end of the day. Love everyone as your brother or your sister as much as you possibly can. And a lot of the times that means keeping a respectful distance if you're able, and it varies
Yes.
species to species, individual to individual. But generally speaking, regarding human to non-human relationships, I think that the best way to go about it is that unless you have a non-human person, you could say like a hybrid who has come here into this society to assist humankind, they've got some kind of skin in the game. Otherwise, I don't typically recommend that human beings get too involved in these other ethereal contracts or communications, because the psychological gap is really wide. It's like night and day. And I've always been with these non-human peoples. They followed me everywhere. I love them dearly. I have no bad effects from any of this. They've been far kinder to me than most human beings for the entirety of my life. But when I brought, for example, my now husband, Artemis, into the scene, they absolutely hated his guts because, well, Tim, like how he treated me. He was a very
Right.
abusive person. His family deeply abused me as well, and they didn't like it. And I slowly over time stopped, asking them to forgive him and to forgive the family. They tormented him until he cracked. And then I was able to help him build himself up from scratch in a much healthier way. And now they somewhat kind of like him. They see what he does for me. They see how he treats me and whatnot. He understands now this different type of psychology, and all is well and safe. But it took 10 and a half years approximately to get to that place. And there's no way I would ever subject anyone else to coming into my world that way unless they were really ready to learn completely different ways of thinking, living, behaving, because it really is that dangerous and it really is that different. I hope that that clarifies. Tim, do you have anything else to add on that subject?
Well, I was just going to say, I've seen people get this way also when they get involved with the UFO phenomenon.
Mm,
That
hmm.
that it also can create obsessive events in a person's life.
Yeah.
Um, sometimes it happens when somebody has like a UFO experience. Other times they're investigating the phenomena and they get drawn into it like that. But whatever the case, uh, that phenomena also has a tendency to draw you in and develop a confirmation bias
Hmm.
with your own personal beliefs, and it also has a tendency um, to get you to isolate yourself from
Yes.
your family and loved ones and friends. I've seen a lot of people that end up getting divorced, or losing their family and loved ones to the point where they become just completely socially withdrawn. And it's not a pleasant experience to see
Hmm.
somebody go through it. And like the person you were talking about, that was on coast to coast, they get to the point where they just cannot see any other way of living,
Hmm.
and they may regret what's happened to them, but they're stuck.
Sure.
and
Yes.
and so with any of this stuff, I just tell people that really, for the most part, you should avoid it. Just don't get involved unless you think that you are emotionally, spiritually, consciously mature enough to handle it and to know when to turn away from it.
Yes. I
I think for a
agree.
lot of I think for a lot of people, that's the hardest thing for them to do, is to just turn away from it
Yeah.
when it gets to be too much, even before it gets to be too much. I mean, I've told people when they're starting, to get, they're there's
Oh, you're frozen again, I think. Can you hear me, dear? Oh, goodness. Uh, can anyone in the chat hear Tim? Can you hear me? He's frozen again. Okay. I'm gonna have to message him. Ooh, it's been kind of, it's been honestly a really active paranormal day here today. And I mean, as you've seen, we already had some difficulties earlier in the chat. Oh boy. Uh, so people can hear me. You see me, right? And thank you for letting me know that he's frozen. Okay, well, while we wait for Tim. Oh, here he is.
I'm here.
Hey, sorry about that there, boss. Welcome
Yeah,
back. What were
yeah,
you
thank
saying?
you. Well, I think whatever I was talking about, somebody didn't like it.
Oh yeah, yeah. Sometimes that happens, but from the feedback I've been gathering, it's not that they're upset with what you're saying. It's just seeming to bring out a lot of energy. There's a lot of excitement about us having this talk tonight, especially from what I'm gathering for the things that you're saying. because a lot of human beings aren't talking about this the way that you are. So you're being very honest about the dangers of this, and you're sitting with me. I have very different psychology than a lot of people in this society, and so they get very excited when I can actually talk with people and have good common ground in this society. So I'm not picking up
Right.
anything negative, but hopefully it'll remain that way. Are you still feeling comfortable to continue?
Oh, sure, sure. Yeah, well, I
Okay,
mean,
please.
it was just what I was saying is that, I people who become interested in this kind of stuff and want to do their own types of investigations or get involved with a group that is investigating. I just always say that, you have to be emotionally, spiritually, consciously mature in
Yes.
order in order to handle this kind of stuff, and that if you also have to be well aware when you are getting too involved. All right, at times it's like like Deborah. Deborah was saying, it can become an addiction. Uh, it can become an emotional addiction, and
Mhm.
this phenomena, whatever it is, and I'll stretch it all across from ghosts and hauntings to UFOs to certain kinds of cryptids and things like that.
Mhm.
They can definitely feed off of that addiction and encourage it for whatever reasons. I mean, everybody's got their own different explanations on why this encouragement can occur. I'm not going to say that because I have no idea really. I'm just saying that you just have to be careful, and that it's not for the weak of heart, or it's not for the spiritually weak to get
Yes.
involved with this kind of stuff, because you have to know when it's time to set it all down and to go out to your garden and plant tomatoes.
Yes. Bingo, right there. Um, I could not agree more with that. And as far as the addiction goes, I think that in order to really get along with non-human peoples, you'd have to either naturally have a very low barrier between your conscious mind and your subconscious mind, or you'd have had to go through a major dark night of the soul and then come out on the other side of that a new being, essentially. So being able to be pure of heart and pure of mind to the non-human standard. And some people get terribly upset when I say this, and yet it still remains true, as far as I know, that the demons, quote unquote, the angels, the daemons, the fairies, the cryptids, all of them seem to have the same or nearly the same standard. And of course, it is a non-human standard. So it is a very high bar for human beings to even begin to touch. And so until someone can humble themselves enough to really do that deep shadow work and that deep heartfelt maturing, I think that they're not going to be fit truly to safely walk into these realms. What do you think about my theory there, Tim, in particular?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think that a lot of people get involved with this stuff because they think it's going to be, it's a hobby. It's, thrills and giggles, and
Yeah.
they're not going into it with the right state of mind, you know. And and then, pretty soon it's like, dude, run
Yeah.
types of situation when things get a little scary, or hairy. And
Yes.
if and it's I run into this a lot when I've done some shows, and all everybody wants to talk about is scary stories. All right. Now, I can see that. I mean, that
Sure.
is, it's fun. It's fun to, to hear these scary stories. But
Especially around Halloween time, am I
oh
right?
yeah, yeah. Well, absolutely. But it's there's so much more to it than that. And I mean, the scary stories are just really superfluous to the
Mhm.
whole thing. And and I have to admit, I like a good scary story. I like looking at these, like at the ghost pictures that pop up on the internet, where people are taking a family photo, and then
Yes.
there's another head behind everybody that
Yes.
wasn't there beforehand. I mean, stuff like that is cool. But if you are going into this kind of stuff as as a paranormal explorer, that you're going into it for the wrong reason. All right. You have to you have to approach it carefully. You have to approach it maturely.
Yeah.
And I don't think that most people are. I don't think they're mature enough, and I don't think that they are familiar enough, as you were pointing out, Tilly, with the different emotions and
Yeah.
really cultural differences between humans and non-human entities. All right.
Yeah.
If you research, say, like old fairy lore, I think
You read
that
my mind. Yes.
yeah, those are great examples of
Mhm.
really on how you need to approach these things. And of course, that's just a small part of it. But I think that that's a good step to take by doing that kind of research before you get into this kind of stuff,
Yes.
because it's once again, you're not always dealing with, say, like a discarnate, fragmented human spirit. There's all kinds of different things out there, and you have to be aware that there are different expectations
Yeah.
when you go into this. And if you don't meet those expectations, then you're going to suffer the consequences.
Right, right. And two, in my understanding, if the non-human peoples are willing to incarnate somehow into this society, they would have more grace for human beings for, any number of reasons. But
Right.
a lot of them who are not embodied here, they tend to have very little grace for humankind, especially if they were to see, for example, one of their own being abused.
Hmm.
That's when all hell would break out. For example, like changelings. Sometimes there would be what started off as a friendly um, deposit of a non-human child into a human family where all parties were aware, and then it would be said that the human family neglected or abused the non-human child over time, and then the non-human family came back with a vengeance to reclaim their child and whatnot. So that's just one example. But then there
Hmm.
are also ones where the human being is totally innocent, does not understand the different culture, as you were saying, and so they make a completely innocent mistake, and then they've been blinded, for example, or they've been cursed. They've gotten elf shot, if people know what that is. So there are a lot of different ways that it could really go. And I think that to be involved healthfully in the paranormal community, in the cryptid community, etc., you've really got to do that in your work. And I mean, my opinion is a terribly unpopular one, but at this point, I'm okay with that because I do think it's the healthiest, dare I say, one out there, at least in my current understanding. But I could always be wrong. So, or I'm sorry, Jen. Oh, hey, hello. This is one of our friends from Facebook. Thank you so very much for being here. We've missed you. How are you? Okay, so Jen says the paranormal has been super emotionally addicting. What makes it so? The right amount of thrill, the amount of unfamiliarity with the subject? I think it's a mixture of all things, but then I also believe that a lot of investigators in the paranormal, they have more addictive brain chemistry. And that's not a slight towards anyone. It's just I'm simply trying to share some more clinical objective information that I seem to be observing. It seems to me that people who are prone to becoming paranormal investigators and sometimes even just paranormal researchers, they have an addictive personality. So these are the kinds of people who tend to, whether through trauma or through pure brain chemistry genetically, they can become addicts pretty easily. The most common would be addiction to alcohol. And so someone might jump from alcohol to marijuana or to DMT or even to this paranormal investigating or paranormal research. I see that all the time behind the scenes, and of course, this is not a dig towards anyone at all. It's just a cold observation of what I keep seeing over and over and over again. So I think it's partly genetic, partly it could be culture, it could be trauma, and then it's also, I think, thrill-seeking behavior and a higher risk tolerance. And of course, that varies person to person. Tim, what are your thoughts?
Well, with me, Tilly, what got me interested, first of all, was the fact that people were coming to me with their stories.
Yes.
Because very early on in elementary school, I had to do an essay assigned by my teacher about flying saucers, and then present in front of the class every week. One kid would get an assignment based on the current news that was coming to us from the Scholastic Book Services newspaper called My Weekly Reader. All right. For me, I got an assignment to do an essay about flying saucers. So in third grade, I had no idea what flying saucers were, so I did the best I could. But then I became the flying saucer guy. I was the
Yep.
guy who believed in little green men from Mars and things like that, which I wasn't. I did not care in the least. But people would come to me and tell me their stories, not just about seeing a UFO or something like that, but ghosts. Lots of ghost
Yeah.
paranormal activity. That's what really got me interested in this, were these individual stories from people whom they weren't interested in publicity or making money or anything like that.
Mhm.
They just had a weird experience, and they wanted to get it off their shoulders to somebody that they thought maybe would be open to their experience and not laugh at them or make fun of them. That's what really got me interested in this. And convinced that there was something going on, were these people who were having these experiences and didn't want to talk about it. All right.
Yeah.
And then, for me also, I love research. I mean, I'm a
Mhm.
big researcher, and
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be the paranormal and stuff like that. I mean, that's for years I was in television news, and my big thing was investigative journalism.
Yeah.
And so I mean it's the thrill of finding information, digging it up, try finding stuff that has been forgotten or stuff that nobody else knows about. And there's the mystery aspect of it all too. I mean, that's thrilling to try to uncover um the mysteries of life, the mysteries of this universe.
Mhm.
So I mean, I suppose in a way, that is kind of an addiction. you know, like some people, are addicted to various other things. I mean, I don't drink, I don't never
Right.
smoked, things like that. But I love a good mystery, and I love
Mhm.
getting involved and trying to root it out.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that you're perfectly suited for that. You seem to love the thrill of the chase, but I appreciate that you're pretty objective in a lot of ways too. So you're not just hounding down on one prescribed type of answer. And I think that's really cool. It keeps you a student for life, you know?
Well, I don't believe that with anything that there is one definitive
Mhm.
answer. There's no one definitive answer to anything,
But
folks.
that right there is a definitive answer.
Yeah, it is, isn't
So I think we have
it?
solved life now. That is all.
That's right. That's it. Thanks,
Yes.
folks. Drive safely. Well, because people ask me, it's like, oh, well, so you believe in flying saucers or you believe in ghosts,
Oh,
and I always
mhm.
say, no, I don't. I don't
Right,
believe in any of this stuff.
right.
I try not to have developed a belief system that's going to shut me down to new information.
You
Because
nailed it.
I always like to think that I am open for new information, new ideas. All right.
Yeah.
And especially when it comes to paranormal phenomena, I mean, there's paranormal phenomena has a tendency to try to get you into a belief system
Yes,
and to
a lot of it
try
does,
to
or to break you out.
narrow. Yes, yes, yes. And it tries to narrow you down. And especially with people who, as we were talking earlier, those who tend to be rather obsessive, um, the phenomena tends to get you into that narrow framework where and the UFO phenomenon is really good at this. Read
Mhm.
any of John Keel's books, and he'll show you
Yes.
how people get caught in this trap where the phenomena will start. You have these like contactees that say the UFO people will be telling them, and when I say UFO people, I mean the people from the UFOs, who they're in contact with, will start giving them predictions, and
Mhm.
you'll see this all the time.
Yeah.
um, there's going to be a UFO outbreak over Mexico City in 2 weeks, and then it happens. All right. There's going to be a plane crash on the East Coast within a month, and it happens. Things like that. And
Mhm.
then once they've got you in, it'll say there's going to be a mass UFO landing on such and such a date. People are going to be taken away, and then there's going to be a huge cataclysm. And then you get out there, you tell everybody, you get on social media, you get on the news, say it's going to
Mhm.
happen, and guess what? It doesn't happen.
Yeah. Yeah, I
That's
agree.
that is the trap. That is the trap. And I don't know why that happens. I don't know, again, if this is like some kind of cosmic round robin feedback situation, but it happens a lot and it happens throughout history, not just with UFO phenomena, but you'll see it happen time and time again. You'll get these various churches who, for some reason, will say, the rapture is going to happen next month.
Yeah.
What
Mhm.
the last year there was this big thing where it went all across various social media that the rapture was going to happen, and you had people
Yeah.
dissolving their families and getting rid of their assets, ready for the rapture, and then it didn't happen. And there's like John Keel said, there's a cosmic joker out there that loves to get people involved in stuff like this.
Right.
Bring him down a notch or something. It's he has all kinds of speculations. I'm not even going to try to speculate why it happens. I'm just saying that it
Mhm.
does.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree with you on that note. Um, a lot of the time, what they've told me is that they pick out certain human beings for certain types of interactions based on what's going on in that person's heart, what lessons they seem to need to learn, or forwarding certain storylines. And so I'm always trying to tell people, like, to be the voice of reason, like, hey, maybe that prediction could come true, maybe not. Maybe this person is a government plant, maybe not. I don't know. I just think that we should all calm down, take a breather, and wait and see what happens. And even like the stuff that I'm told behind the scenes, I don't share the vast majority of it, because even if it is accurate, I don't want to stir the cosmic pot, if you will. You know what I mean?
I
There's
like that.
already
I like that. Stir the cosmic pot.
yeah, the cosmic cauldron. I don't
Yeah.
want to stir it. And like the non-human companions that I keep, everything that they have told me ever has come true. And I'm still watching things unfold that some of them told me like 10, 12 years ago. You know, some stuff that they told me a few months ago is starting to unfold. But what does talking about it really change? All it does is, in my opinion, draw more attention to whatever matter it is. And then that brings more energy out of the participants for whomever to begin to feed on and enjoy. In theory, anyways, this is just how I understand it. So I would just rather win by not playing. You know what I mean? Um, and it just seems to me that the most credible witnesses, who seem to be the most grounded, at least by my standard, tend to be the quietest. They're not typically the ones out there on the massive shows saying, oh, the world is ending in September, or the rapture is coming. You know what I mean? So I don't know. That's just my take on it, at risk of being hashtag canceled, but I guess I'll just have to live with that. And if it happens, but if anyone would like to learn more about my own life and encounters, including some of my own esoteric exorcist work, Tim is my publisher, and we have just put out, can you see that okay? Enchanted Objects. So Tillie Treadwell's Enchanted Objects, that's available wherever you get your finest books. Nice, big, thick volume. It is my very first standalone nonfiction title, and I'm going to be working on Enchanted Objects 2 here soon. You know, Tim and I have lots of other neat things in the works, but I thought, you know, that might be a nice little tie-in. So if you're curious about my life, what it's like to live in such a haunted house and in such a haunted life, there you go. I mean, I call it inhabited, but traditionally speaking here, you call it haunted. And I'm cool with that too, I guess. But
Yeah,
anyways,
it's
back to
Tilly.
what?
I just want to say that very very well researched book.
Thank you.
Just like it is it's just chock full of just really excellent information that I really encourage people to read it because they'll definitely learn a lot of new stuff from this.
Yes. Thank you, Tim. And Tim wrote the foreword for that book, which is such an honor and such a pleasure to be a part of the team. But then to have Tim Swartz, the man, the myth, the legend himself, writing my foreword, I didn't even see that coming. So, yes, please do check that out, because, as you say, there's tons of groundbreaking research that I included, and a lot of it comes from my own classified research behind the scenes in quantum laboratories. So while I can't say certain things out loud because of certain contracts that I've signed and certain deals that I've had to make in order to, you know, help the society continue moving forward, I do drop a lot of wisdom and fresh new knowledge, and then I tie it back to more classic physics and other types of sciences. So you can still get the great picture of it, but without me risking my head on a silver platter.
No, it really is. I mean, I think that anyone who has wondered about this idea of objects, whether or not that they could be haunted, or even what that means or
Yeah.
involves. This is the book
Yep.
that will help answer those questions and probably bring out a few more.
Yeah. 100%. And it was so interesting because my whole life, especially during my time with the Catholic Church and a few years after, I was searching for essentially this book. And I came to realize over all the years that it was never written, that no one had sat in my seat to be able to write such a book. And I'm just coming to grips these days with how different my experience of life is. And that's still kind of jarring for me, you know? So to realize that this book hadn't been written, and to realize that this is a place where I can sincerely and deeply, meaningfully contribute to society, I realized that it was an opportunity I couldn't pass up. And I'm so very grateful to be here and to have Tim helping me do all of this for all of you, because we're at such a beautiful, I think, apocalyptic time in this society. And I hope that indeed you'll pick up both the persistence of ghosts and Tillie Treadwell's enchanted objects, because, well, they say that you can't teach an old dog new tricks, but I would beg to disagree if you read these two books, especially if you read them back to back. You never know.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Something that occurred to me, and this goes back to one of our previous conversations,
Yeah.
that we were talking about how it may be best for people not to get involved with this kind of stuff.
Mm.
And you had mentioned the like the Fae and what they expect or from
Mhm.
people. And one of the things that always fascinated me, and this is just one little example that
Yeah.
I think for a lot of people would seem rude
Ah.
if you didn't do this. But
Mm.
there are a number of cultures that state that if you have a favor done for you by the Fae, you don't thank them for it.
Yes,
That is
correct.
considered rude if you thank them, which is goes completely against our own cultural upbringings.
Yes.
But
Yes.
the explanations on why it's considered rude to thank them makes a lot of sense. But that's just one small example of how easily, I suppose, that people could just blunder into uh, 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 um,
Offense.
well, any kind of association with, a non-human entity, you
Mm.
have to approach it very, very gently, because it's the cultural difference. I mean,
Mhm.
it just, a lot of times it seems to be the antithesis of what we were raised to believe.
It does, yes. Yeah, I agree with you. And I'm interested that you brought that up, because that's always my default too when I talk about the cultural differences, is to speak about thank you. So according to what I've learned historically, and then what I've also been told by my own connections, is that thank you originally meant um, it was a way of acknowledging or accepting work that an employee did for you. It was like a sign of status above someone. So it's very rude to thank someone by their measure, because because they're so contractual, there's very little nuance for how a lot of them view communication and language. Once, for example, they understand, like, say you put an apple in front of them and you tell them that in English this fruit is called apple, then there is no other interpretation, typically speaking, because that's just how they are neurologically wired in a lot of cases, in my understanding. People, again, who may be hybrid or who have a lot more association with humankind, they will probably have a fair amount of grace somewhere, but the truly wild ones, they don't. So a workaround that I've been taught and that I've used myself over the years is to understand that a lot of these non-human peoples, they don't see or experience boundaries the way that human peoples do. So, Tim, you view yourself as you and yourself, and you have very limited experience of other people's thoughts, emotions, energies. You experience them as an observer from the outside. Non-human peoples, in my experience, they tend to be what you could say would be an extreme empath. So they have access to a human beings and to other non-human people's, a lot of the time, thoughts, their inner worlds, their prayers, their fears, their energy, their needs, their desires, their shapes, all of it to some deeper degree or another. And so since they don't have those boundaries, I'm told, they never see a need or a desire for separation in that way. So thanking them is actually an insult. It is asserting that you are not only separate from them, but that you're above them. And so the more culturally acceptable way to essentially say what human beings would be to say, I appreciate that, or I appreciate you, or I really appreciate that, or I really appreciate you, and then to offer to return the favor. Because if that person is coming to you offering you this, whether you solicited it or not, but that's another huge cultural difference that we could talk about for a while, honestly. Whether it was solicited or not, if they care enough typically to offer to help you, it means that they're showing a level of care and respect towards you, typically, that they otherwise would not. They are seeing something redeeming in that human being. I hope that
Mhm.
that makes sense.
Mhm.
And so you can politely decline if you truly don't want to engage. That's also perfectly okay. You can make a heartfelt type of excuse like, "Oh, I really appreciate that. Unfortunately, I've already eaten. Can I take it for later?" And then sometimes, the food or the object will revert to whatever enchanted material it was because it hadn't been used in the intended way or time frame, etc., etc. Um, Stocks, that's one. Fetches and stocks, for example. Things are
Mhm.
not often, what they seem. But that's a culturally different way to navigate it. If you do, however, wish to build that rapport, gently accepting it and then asking, how might I repay you? Or something of the sort, expressing a lot of gratitude and then offering to return that favor usually goes, in my experience, very, very well. If, of course, the human variable is pure and kind of intention. But there, of course, are other stories where non-human peoples have approached human beings in the forest and said, hey, eat this, or hey,
Mhm.
follow me. It doesn't go well. And I always encourage people to follow their gut as much as they can. And of course, you might be completely out of your mind with fear and misjudging the situation. So again, please try to remain as calm and generally respectful as you possibly can, and it's probably going to be okay. Probably. Um, it's a complete coin cost coin toss. Thank you.
Coin toss. There
Depending
you
Yes,
go.
thank you. Depending on the different peoples that you have involved in the situation. So again, it just goes back to doing your shadow work at the end of the day for me. If someone really has done the shadow work, a lot of the time I found that even though there are massive cultural differences, there are certain non-human peoples that will completely throw away any type of difference in order to really help someone in their journey. Um, but again, I really only recommend that someone here works with non-human peoples who have chosen to completely incarnate here in this society, or ones that are visibly there in body at the time as some type of incarnate person, because they have typically some type of stake in the society. Does that make sense?
Oh,
I hope
sure.
so.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Well, and you look at the old stories um, of, say, like travelers that they'd be traveling from one village to the other through the woods, and come across, say, like a Fey party, and are
Yes.
invited to participate, have a drink, eat the food, dance with us, and
Yeah.
generally that doesn't end well.
Typically not. No.
No, no. Well, but see, and if you look at some of these UFO reports of people who have been invited into these spaceships, the spaceships, and are offered food and drink, fruit that's bigger and sweeter and juicier than any earthly known fruit,
Yeah.
drinks that, I mean, it's like ambrosia. I mean, it's you're hearing the very same kind of stories, just the stories are the same, the faces may look different,
Yes.
but underlying it is probably the same source, whatever that source is. Again, I'm not going to go and try to offer, what that source is. I'm just
Mhm.
saying that there is a connection, and that we're seeing the same kind of things played out over the centuries,
Mhm.
um, changing based on your cultural expectations.
Yes, absolutely. I've come to the same conclusion because that's what I have always been told from the time I was a very, very young child up until even now, even just, today. I mean, we had that electrical interference earlier, far earlier in the show, Tim.
Hmm.
And that was when they were talking to me. They were right beside me, explaining more from their side, and it's exactly what you're saying. These non-human beings and peoples, they adapt to the human element and to the culture, to the cultural expectations the vast majority of the time. And for me, that goes back to them having no or extremely low ego content, a lot of them. But then we get to, the wild fae. A lot of them actually that I've encountered, they have even higher ego content than human beings. And that makes them even more volatile a lot of the time towards human beings,
Hmm.
because not only is there the cultural difference, the language, the communication difference, but they have more fiery tempers a lot of the time than human beings. They're very set a
Hmm.
lot of the time in their personalities, even though they might change the masks. And so approaching them, in my opinion, is even more important, to be respectful than, say, when you encounter a more domestic type of non-human entity, or what seems to be a ghost in your home. So the further away from the city and your home you go, typically the wilier these non-human peoples tend to be. And that poses a far harsher penalty on the human people than what you'd encounter domestically. So, for example, um, my colleague and associate, Steve Mera, and Barry Fitzgerald, over at Project Doorway and whatnot. I've worked with them a bit in the past, and I still, occasionally follow their work. Well, Steve talks about how some of the gnarliest encounters he's ever had were way out in the middle of the forest. And that tracks exactly with what I have encountered as well. And they've never been harsh to me. They've never tried to hurt me. They've never threatened me. I've never had a problem out in the deep woods when I would go. But they did sometimes approach me to say, "Hey, what are you doing here?" And then they would talk to me and give me advice, or give me feedback, and we'd have some long conversations. And I wrote about that actually for Erie Expeditions magazine. I have a blog over there. I'm on hiatus right now because of the family medical stuff going on with poor Artemis. Um, but I wrote about one of those encounters with um uh I don't want to say man, with a person who seemed to be a leshy, if anyone's familiar with that. Do you know what that is, Tim?
Not offhand.
Oh, okay. It's pretty obscure, to be honest, but it's essentially an old man of the forest. You could say it's
Oh,
like an
okay.
old, yeah, one of those, but European folklore. He
So
approached me,
is that similar to like the Green Man?
very similar, yes.
Okay. All right.
Very similar, yes. So he approached me, and he presented at first as a human man. And we walked the forest together, and I noticed that the path seemed to be changing. The environment was changing. And then as we were walking, he was slowly changing. His appearance was changing. And I noticed that he was seemingly responding to me very well, because I was essentially speaking his language. And so I had one of the most profound talks with him there in the middle of the woods. But he taught me that a lot of the time human beings are not welcome in the woods because of the deep cultural differences and the threats that human beings cause to the forest. So, and for example, a lot of hauntings, this ties into the persistence of ghosts a little bit. A lot of hauntings contain ill will towards dogs. This keeps coming up in my research and experiences over and over and over. So, and actually, I pitched a book to you recently about this, kind of. Raining Cats and Dogs, yes.
Right.
They absolutely hate dogs, a lot of them, from what I've seen and been told. And so a lot of the time human beings will bring dogs into the woods and the forest, and they'll let them defecate everywhere, chase the wildlife, tear up the bushes, things of that nature. Human beings will litter as well. They leave trash, they'll play loud music, they'll have the loud phone conversations, urinate in the bushes, and lots of other things that we don't talk about for this PG show. But so there's a lot of animosity there. There's a lot of hatred there. And so anyway, it's just a completely different species out in the woods compared to what we have more domestically.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you hear that also with alleged Bigfoot, that there is a very much an animosity between Bigfoot and dogs. Uh, uh, and
Yeah.
if the chance ever comes that they will kill a dog.
Yes.
Um, but it's interesting because, gosh, and it's been a few years ago. There were a group of Bigfoot hunters that they noticed that women a lot of times will have more Bigfoot sightings than men because the Bigfoot seems to be attracted to the human women. So they actually had it set up where they had this one woman who, was someone who was experienced in the woods. She was going to go out into this area where there had been sightings before and camp for a few days just to see if
Oh
she
my.
could stir up some activity by herself, no men or anything like that.
Mhm.
Nothing ever happened because she took her dog with her.
Mhm.
And it wasn't until afterwards that they were like, oh, yeah. It didn't occur to anybody at the time
Yeah,
that it
yeah,
that it wasn't, it probably wouldn't work because she had her dog with her.
yeah,
You
yeah.
know, and so yeah. I mean, you do see that it's it's funny how these types of traditions tend to overlap in all kinds of
Yeah.
different directions.
Yeah, no joke. And too, I feel like they were actually being very kind to her by not killing the dog and not
Yeah.
hurting her. You know what I mean? So
Oh
they must
yeah.
have liked something about her. But Skinwalker Ranch too, there were reports of several dogs being killed, if I'm remembering properly. And then a lot of cases that I worked when I was with the Catholic Church, and even before and after, even to this day, with some cases that I quietly consult on, there are almost always dogs involved, and it's almost always a negative situation. Almost always. And even me, the life that I live, my husband had dogs for quite a while, and all of my companions absolutely hated the dogs.
Mm,
And if anyone's curious, it's because typically speaking, as far as I know, dogs are seen as the incarnate quote unquote worst by their standards of humankind.
mm,
You know, filth, greed and gluttony, wrath and violence and all of that. And so a lot of them, they really do not like dogs at all. And if you were to look into zootropic disease risk and dog attacks and unpredictability of dog, and then the ways that dogs are documented to be very sneaky in a lot of ways, and to be extremely disloyal, as in always running away, those kinds of things, that's what they often point to. when it comes to their hatred of dogs. So I have seen personally, a lot of them have been very violent towards dogs. Here's the thing though, there's nuance. A lot of them, if the dog is very clean and well behaved, well bred, well trained, they have no issue with the dog. There's even an affection some of the time. But it's because they're not viewing that dog as a classic dog. They see it as an exception, you know what I mean, and not
Sure.
part of the rule. So that's my experience with it. And two, I can't be around dogs all like that because I'm allergic to a lot of the stuff that they've physically got going on. They are, pretty unclean. And I don't say that to be mean. I just say it as a matter of fact. You scientifically speaking, you wash a dog and like 10 minutes later it's already filthy, whether it's because it's been rolling outside or just the way that their skin oils operate. They spring up bacteria, and so they're very unclean in that way. But then that can get into the whole magnetic anomalies stuff too, where there are sanitary zones
Right.
where these non-human peoples are coming into this realm from elsewhere. So sanitization seems to play quite a big role in their opinions. And I write about that too, actually, in Enchanted Objects, the necessity of hygiene in the paranormal.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. You brought up something that has these are questions that I have come up with. You're talking about Skinwalker Ranch,
Yeah.
but this has happened, in other types of locations that are similar to Skinwalker Ranch. Is the whatever the phenomena is, it loves to pick on animals, not just
Yeah.
dogs, cattle,
Yeah.
whatever. I mean, to the point where it's brutal. Horses. There was a story about an area in Missouri that was known as Marley Woods. That's not its actual name. That was just the name that was given to it because they didn't want to reveal where it actually was and draw people in. And
Yeah.
it was a wider area than say Skinwalker Ranch, but in one of the farms that was located in this area, the owner had horses, and he had one horse in a barn. And he went in, checked on the horse, fed it, just for other things. Went outside for a couple of minutes. When he came back inside, the horse had literally just exploded. There
Oh.
was nothing left of it. It was all over the floors and the walls and the ceilings. It was like somebody had hit it with a hand grenade. All right. In all of these cases, I don't think that I have ever heard of a situation where people have been mutilated or exploded, or things that happen to these animals. So what is the exception? Why animals, not people?
From what I understand, from what I've been told, is that they they see everything on a tier list. So, for example, some will not entertain friendship or mating or anything with human beings for one reason or another, but then others see human beings as an extended family branch, and so they're fine, contacting to one degree, or maybe even coming here to the society. It all just depends. But they judge, in my understanding, based on levels of sentience and or possibility of sentience. So the more, for example, free will someone has developed, the more they've done the shadow work, the more intelligent and introspective they are, the more respectful they tend to be by default. But then when it comes to, you could say toys or food, etc., some of them see animals, non-human animals, not non-human beings, but non-human animals like cats, dogs, horses, etc., as nothing more than food to be harvested or body parts, things like that. I mean, human beings do the same thing with rats in the laboratory a lot of the time.
Sure.
It's just how it is. The whole hierarchy down here. I don't like it. I don't agree with it. This is just what I seem to know about it. So I try not to really pass too much judgment on it, but it does make me terribly uncomfortable. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
Um, so each species and then each family within that, and then each individual, as far as I know, has at least some degree of difference from the other because each incarnate lifetime adventure is different. It offers a different viewpoint. So even if someone doesn't have a body in the way that like I do and you do, my friend, um, they're still living out different stories, and so everyone develops their own different point of view to some degree or another. So some of them have no issue, like you said, blowing up a horse for whatever reason. Some of them say that horses are sacred to them, and so they are said to be protectors of horses or cats or certain types of, breeds of dogs. There was a very famous breed of alleged fairy dog at one point that was regarded as sacred in certain countries. So it really just all depends. The one the one answer that I can give everyone is that there is no one answer.
Which frustrates a lot of people. They want, that definitive answer to everything. you know, it's that idea that our world can be compartmentalized
Yeah.
and filed away in its own separate sections, and it just
And this,
doesn't
this
work
is
like
why I'm not very popular with the bigwigs, as you know, in some ways.
No, you can't though. I mean, none of this can be compartmentalized.
Mm-mm.
And that's one of the things that, I talk about and I tell people. I said, the human mind wants to compartmentalize everything. And the paranormal especially, you can't put you can't put paranormal phenomena in a corner.
Right, right. And the best advice I have for anyone when trying to work with what seems to be a ghost or what seems to be some kind of non-human person of any kind is just to remain as calm and as respectful as you can and honest. That's a huge one. I
Right,
would beg of you not to lie. If you don't want to answer, just say, I'm not comfortable answering that. If
right,
if if there's some other reason, just be very honest about it. But then also be very accurate with your language. If someone is meaningfully inaccurate or meaningfully dishonest, that will absolutely bring down the wrath of most of these non-human beings. And then two, even when I was working with the Catholic Church doing these alleged ghost cases, they really the human beings who were moving on out of this incarnation, they hated the the being lied about or the being lied to, all of that. So as kind and as pure as you can be, that's what I suggest doing when working with the paranormal in any way. Kindness, honesty, and accuracy, I think, is really the golden trifecta here. You know what I mean?
yep. And be not afraid.
Yes, and be not afraid. That is massive. If I think that if people could relax and not be so afraid, that would honestly solve a lot of the problems.
Yep.
Because when I've worked with a lot of these non-human companions, even the wilder ones out in the woods, they say that if typically anyways, not all of them, but a lot of them say, well, if they don't understand something, we think that they should ask questions and just be honest about what they don't understand and why they don't understand it and tell us their viewpoint. And then most likely it's going to be fine. But as you know, Tim, a lot of human beings don't do that. They make those snap judgments and then they'll end a relationship, they'll end, something a connection based on that judgment. And it's typically going to be very wrong because of cultural and neurological differences. And then that sets
Right.
bad blood up between people. You know what I mean? I hope that
Oh
makes
yeah.
sense. I feel like
Yep.
I'm off in the woods myself now.
No, no, makes perfect sense. Tillie, I'm going to have to say that we've reached the 2 hour mark here, and
Yes.
I'm going to have to wrap it up. My certain parts of my body are starting to fall asleep.
Yes.
But
Well, that is all right.
I've enjoyed this conversation, and I really hope that our audience has enjoyed this as well and has come away maybe with some fresh perspectives on everything that we've talked about.
Perhaps, perhaps. And I don't blame you one bit, my dear. The 2 hour mark is where I was intending to wrap it up anyways, because it is getting to be a little long. However, I also have thoroughly enjoyed my time with you. I thank you and I appreciate you coming on with me today, sir. For everyone listening, I still saw some questions in the chat. I'm going to stay on a bit longer to help get those squared away. Maybe half an hour more at most, and then I will have to bid you all a farewell too. So, with that being said, let us give Tim a wish for a happy and healthy night, and we will talk to him soon.
Thank you, Tillie. Like I said, I had a great time tonight. I always have a wonderful time talking with you. Our conversations go off in all kinds of different directions, but that's what makes it fun, right?
Yes, absolutely. All right, my dear, I'll be in touch with you soon. We'll get something set up for later in the summer, okay?
All right. Good night now.
Good night. All right, my dears, thank you very much for joining us with that. I have some time to address some questions. Deb, I like what you're getting at. Yes, Catholicism, hoodoo. I feel like a lot of the time they do tend to produce a different grade, you could say, of exorcists, quote unquote, or practitioners in general, because they're not just saying like they're God and the devil. They acknowledge that there are other types of beings and peoples and saints, and there's a lot going on there. And I think that that is definitely closer to the truth than what traditional human religions tend to teach. Jen, I really appreciate you. Faye is enough to show gratitude with our words. Um, you may have missed it, but earlier we were talking about how, at least in my experience, not putting labels on these types of non-human peoples seems to be the most respectful. So, my advice would just to be saying something like, "I appreciate you," or "I sincerely appreciate that," or "I really appreciate that." Something of that nature, leaving off that genetic type of label, because a lot of these non-human peoples are extremely low in ego content, and some of them have no ego content whatsoever. And so, in order to forward your storyline, they will then begin to act in ways that they understand human beings to traditionally expect the Fae of that region to interact. And that may go well for you, it may not go well for you. So I suggest simply treating every person that you encounter as an individual. If you do that, in my experience, it tends to be a lot smoother of a relationship, because then you are seeing one to one, theoretically, each other's hearts. And so this is one thing that I have to say is completely different than human psychology and human culture. So in human society, they're always saying, don't judge a book by its cover, right? They're trying to say like it's not all as it seems. With human psychology, though, that is some of the worst advice anyone could ever follow, at least in my opinion and in my experience. And I tried to believe in that rosy tinted view for a very long time. And I was using the wrong psychology on the wrong people, to be completely honest with you. If I had just taken people for what they were presenting to me here, I would have saved myself years and decades of agony and physical risk and trauma. However, when it comes to non-human peoples, that is precisely the type of advice that I would tend to give, is to never believe what you at first see, hear or even experience to some degree. And so therefore, skipping the label altogether and just speaking heart to heart would tend to get you a lot further, in my experience and in my opinion, because they don't want to be lumped together as far as I've seen. And so while they may hope that you'll be able to understand and respect their culture in other ways, they don't want to be seen as just their genetics. Typically speaking, as I have encountered, they want to be seen as an individual soul spark in a lot of ways. So a lot of them, in my experience, they do tend to be, you could say, hive mind related. They experience a lot of plants and animals and other beings' journeys pretty intimately. So they will be able to read your mind, read your heart. They know your prayers, for example, and they may show up to fulfill a certain contract or a certain wish or something else. And a lot of the time, it will be up to the human element to determine how that relationship is going to pan out. So if you're comfortable and you understand fully what you yourself believe the Fae to be, and you would like to offer them that role in your life, then I would support you in that adventure. Those are just my 2 cents on the matter, and I do hope that helps. Let me see. Do you feel the best exorcists are ones who were once possessed, then cured, and relieved from it? No, I do not. Because typically speaking, in my experience, once someone has gone down the road of being possessed or co-inhabiting with someone of that lower feeding vibration, it leaves a very lasting scar. And that person then is never truly, purely him or herself again. And therefore, the agenda may always be muddled. Aside from that, I am not a Catholic exorcist. I am an esoteric exorcist. This means that I believe and I practice the healing of the internal psyche and all of the hidden esoteric matters behind the scenes that led to the possession or the co-inhabitation or the poltergeist type of activity. So I have a very different take on this. Even if, in my understanding, someone were to end that contract successfully, they're always going to be at some type of risk. And this typically denotes someone who, clinically speaking, has a very high ego content amount. And this tends to mean that this person is, by default, resistant to clinical therapy. They're resistant to feedback, especially if it's, by their judgment, unsolicited, even if it would change their life for the better and make all of their dreams come true. So they're just very resistant to outside feedback generally. And that tends to mean that they're a lot more stubborn. They like to do things their way. And what is that old saying? It is easier to trick someone than to convince someone that they have been tricked. So I have never known of anyone who has clinically recovered from being cohabitated or possessed in the classic demonic sense. And I don't think that it's honestly, quote unquote, possible, at least as far as I know, because it seems to me that the person is not only then having to do all their shadow work, but then they're also needing to get clinical treatment. There are often also nutritional and medical issues that compounded all of the factors that led into that cohabitation and or possession. And they would have to get everything treated probably over decades of time in order to heal from all of that and to account for their high ego content clinically to guard from such a thing happening again. And I don't see that happening very often. If you look into it too, goodness, I can't remember his name. Jerry Marzinski, I think his name was. It was Jerry something. Anyways, he equivocated high religiosity with high possession, and high religiosity with high possession risk and high possession rates. And I agree with that entirely. Not to say that I hate anyone who is religious or that I oppose anyone being religious. I think that we all have our sacred path, and I'm happy to support them all. I'm simply saying that this is another high risk factor for this type of haunting and possession, because people who are high in religiosity also tend to be clinically high, very high, in ego content. And the same can be said about people who have addictive personalities, because a lot of the time those go hand in hand. This is why we have phenomena such as, the religious cult leaders. There just seems to be a new one every single year. You know what I mean? So that's my understanding. I hope that helps. Yes. Okay. So about the dogs. Yes, I have read that about Islam, and I find that really, really fascinating. I feel largely the same way about dogs, to be honest. I probably will never have another dog in my life. I don't tend to like dogs at all. There are a few gems that I absolutely adore, but they tend to be very much the exception and not even remotely the rule. But that's just my opinion. Sometimes, yeah. So this is really interesting. Your question about dogs and corners, because sometimes too cats or birds or lizards they'll stare off into the corner, and it seems like there's nothing there. But with advancements in technology, it does seem to correlate that sometimes indeed there is someone or something there. Corners are very special to less incarnate or discarnate peoples because they hold energy. They're kind of like closets or vents. They're small spaces that are contained, and they hold energy a lot better. I'm hoping that more scientific evidence will come out about that at some point, but this gets into some of the work that I do. But yes, corners are especially important to these types of beings. Let's see. I'm not entirely sure, Jen, that she has her hounds. I'd have to do more research about what you're asking, and I would need to chat with my own connections, honestly, because I'm not entirely sure what you mean by that. If you mean it literally, if you mean it more metaphorically, you'd have to give me more context, honestly, and then maybe I could try to answer it, but I do apologize. You're most welcome. I'm glad that everyone here has loved it. Yes, it was fun to see him, wasn't it? I'm so glad. Literature Mystery School, welcome. I'm so sorry. I have just seen that you joined. Yes, this is live right now, my dear. I'm still here. Tim is gone for the night. He's a little bit older than me, so he has his bedtime, and I don't blame him one bit. Let me see. Hi, Lucia. Do I know you, my dear? Welcome. It's okay. Lucia, may I ask your name or who you are. I cannot tell if I know you or not. But while Tim is gone, I'm happy to be here for a few more moments answering questions. If anyone has any questions, comments, concerns, feedback, I am more than happy to hear it. The more unsolicited, the better, especially if you can think of any ways in which I might improve anything for you, my dears. So while you're thinking of any questions that you may have, I need a water refill. I'll be right back. What we got here? Okay, so Lucier, Lucier. I'm sorry, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, but I'll call you Mystery School for now until you correct me, if that's all right. Mystery School says, "Hi Tillie, have you ever been abducted by aliens?" I get asked that question a lot. And I think it depends on how you would define abducted, really. I mean, I get visitations of all sorts all the time. It's no big deal for me. And how do you define aliens? Are you talking about space aliens? Are you talking about just anyone who is not quite from here? It really just depends on how you're meaning to define those. But typically, I don't tend to talk a lot about my other encounters if I were to have any at all. I mean, who doesn't love a good mystery, you know? There are just some secrets perhaps a lady shouldn't tell. Oh, hey. Hey, darling. Welcome. I'm happy to see you. I love the questions that you're asking. Maybe some other time we could talk, but this isn't typically something that I talk about publicly. I mean, I appreciate certainly the spirit of the question, but sometimes there are just some things that I'd rather keep to myself. Whether I have been or not, I leave that up to your imagination. Let me see. All right. Does anyone else happen to have any questions? Please think of them and put them in the chat. And in the meantime, would anyone like to hear an excerpt from The Persistence of Ghosts? Interesting. Would you care to elaborate on that? It is exactly why I'm the oldest of my kind. If you'd like to share, I'd like to hear. Read? Of course. Very interesting. All right, my friends. So I was thinking that I could read what I wrote about was it a death experience or a near-death experience that I had last year? I'll let you be the judge of that. But I will be more than happy to read that to you. Just one moment, please. You'd think that I'd have the book memorized by now, but not quite. Okay, so My dear friend Jim says, "Hi Tillie, have you ever lived in any haunted houses?" In the classical sense, I would say yes. I've lived in all types of different inhabited houses, but activity follows me essentially anywhere that I go. And so wherever I go is a haunted house. Oh, that reminds me. Um, I think next time I'm going to get my hubby Artemis on to talk about this exact thing, because we have some cool stories together that I think you guys would really appreciate and really enjoy. He has a particularly wild one from when we went to last year's Full Disclosure Now conference. We were too late to be speakers or vendors, but we were there as honored and noted guests from the organizer, who is a good friend of ours. And we had a wild encounter there that I'm sure you'd really enjoy hearing about. All right, my friends. So I'm going to go ahead and read this for you. While you're listening, please do feel most welcome to leave any other further questions and comments in the chat, and I will get back to them with you in just a moment. So this is an excerpt from our book, The Persistence of Ghosts. This is from chapter 5. This is called Dire Circumstances. It was the early morning of March 17th, 2025, a notable day for me, especially because I'm a touch under half Irish. The blood moon eclipse had passed a few days before. My husband and I had gleefully, completely celebrated it, and I had gone to bed happily enough after my evening prayers. In the silence of the night, however, all did not seem well. My heart woke me, fluttering as quickly as it could, but lacking might. My legs were cramping up, every muscle tighter than I had ever felt before, and I couldn't feel my chest, arms, neck, back, or face. What I could feel of my physical form was incredibly hot. All attempts to open my eyes and roll from my back to face my slumbering husband failed. I was paralyzed while the leg cramping intensified, my heartbeat grew weaker, and the numbness spread. Thankfully, this only lasted approximately 3 seconds before I found my consciousness, me, falling somehow both down and in, first feeling as though my consciousness was in my chest, and then it gathered in my forehead before I fell down and in from there, shrinking as I did. I looked around. I was on a park path. It was a light gray color, smooth and uniform in every consideration. To my left, the path was lined with what looked to be purple wisteria trees, all mature and in full bloom. On the right, black iron park lamps lit the way. It seemed as though this was an early, somewhat misty morning, judging by the light, which was even and seemed to lack an origin point. It was all so beautiful and peaceful. I was wearing a somewhat loose, floor-length silk or satin slip dress in a fresh, light green color. The thin shoulder straps felt light and breezy. It was a simple but attractive and comfortable outfit. I cannot recall if I was barefoot or in some kind of matching slippers, but moving was far easier than it had been for me in many years. My hair was perfectly styled, better than the best hair day I've ever had on earth, and I was in immaculate health. To anyone who is familiar with the NDE I had in 2023, the same person was present with me here. Who is she, quote unquote? I don't claim to know. And yet, she was here. Again, she didn't allow me to see her, but I knew that she was standing right beside me. You're dead now, she spoke to me telepathically. I began to panic. No, that can't be. I haven't found a way to communicate with them yet. I grabbed my face and tried to run from her down the path. I found my husband, who was one of the people that I was frantically searching for, and we stood on the little path while I tried to find all the words to explain what he'd need to know now that I was leaving. He stood quietly, patiently listening, but not really taking it in or reacting. When I saw this, I continued my sprint down the park path until I found other people, and the cycle repeated. During this time, out of disbelief and trauma, I accidentally popped out of my quote-unquote incarnate form. Deciding that I liked this coping mechanism, I employed it over and over when I felt too overwhelmed. I could see everything from there, the whole park scene in 360 degrees, my ego self interacting with various characters, the details of my clothes and hair and skin. I had no ego at all in this state. It was pure bliss and peace, solely observing. From here, the idea of self was full of meaning, familiar, yet foreign, out of reach emotionally and psychologically. I marveled at all of existence in a moment of complete awareness then and experimented in diving into and out of my incarnate ego and the living story. They can't hear you, she finally said. I stopped, mired in sadness and acceptance. She and I took a walk. I trust that you have a great imagination, dear reader, and so I'll leave it up to you to dream up what we might have discussed and what she might have shown me. While I will not share the details, I can say that this experience, death, was the greatest and most helpful event in my entire life. After a while, I asked her, "Where do I go now?" "Wherever you want," came her answer. At peace, I chose to come back to Earth to get my unfinished business settled. I wanted to see how the earthly stories would unfold. I concentrated as hard as I could on the details of the version and vibration of Earth that I desired, as well as those of myself, and as I squeezed my eyes closed, I was able to simultaneously see from the ego incarnate form and from the eternal external vantage point as a soft pink light began to fill my vision and the scene. I willed myself to inhabit that timeline with all my might, and the light grew into a stronger pink, taking on a golden hue until it built into a flash. Then poof, I was sitting up in bed, my heart perfectly calm and with no concerning symptoms whatsoever. And for anyone who may be wondering, there was no white light, no tunnel, no life review or judgment in any death experience I personally had. There we have it. There is the true story of my, you could say, death or near-death experience last year. I am clearly in far better health now, but for anyone who may not know, I've had severe physical health problems for my entire life, and they've just come to a head over the last decade, but they've gotten so much worse over the last 5 years. And I've finally gotten hooked up with the proper specialists, and now I'm on the mend. I'm on the rise, and I'm a guinea pig. I am in a lot of studies behind the scenes, a lot of genetic studies, a lot of quantum studies. There's just a lot that I get into when I'm not writing books or talking with you lovely folks here. The good news is that they have found new treatments for me, and I'm very happy about this because I'd like to continue to be here and I'd like to avoid that type of death experience, even though it turned out well in the end, and even though it was, some of it at least, was enjoyable to me. The actual dying part really wasn't that great, and I'd like to avoid that, if at all possible, until it really is time for me to leave. But if you'd like to hear more about how my near-death or death experience hooks into everything else my fellow authors write about, you can check that out here. This is The Persistence of Ghosts. You can find it on Amazon. I write about unfinished business in that particular chapter right after I explain that experience. All right, let's hop back into the chat. Hello, welcome. I'm not sure who you are, but I welcome you regardless. This person says, I grew up in the 60s near the mines in northern Minnesota. Visitors came to draw water from the lake behind our house regularly. Sometimes they grabbed us for the walk. Oh, that's intriguing. I would love to hear more about that if you would love to share. Let's see. They literally made people act like drones, but I never fell under their control. That is intriguing. I've heard lots of different stories, just like that for years and years. Okay. You are most welcome, my dears. Record an audiobook. If I get enough interest and requests for that, I absolutely would. I run my own shop, intermediary.art, and I sell the books right now, as well as lots of other cool things. I've got plenty of incredible goodies coming, but I have been getting more requests for audiobooks of the books that I write in my own voice. So if people are willing to truly pay for that, and the time and the energy that it would take me to put that out, I'd be more than happy to do that. Deb, amazing story. Thank you. It is a true story, and it's a pretty niche one, to be honest. I don't really get to talk about it that much, but it's something that is near and dear to my heart. And in fact, I don't know. Can you see this here? These are purple wisteria. I mean, they're not real, but they are artificial silk weeping wisteria flowers. And the whole reason I have implemented them into the decor is because they are now a sacred flower to me. There we go. There. This is part of the moon gate that we have set up. It's a sacred space in our living room. It is an energy point, we like to say. It's not fully decorated right now. I don't have a ton of summer decor. I hope that changes by next year. But, for Christmas and for Halloween and autumn, it's going to be all decked out. But for now, what I would consider the holy element is the representation of the wisteria. Awesome. Yes. Please do, if you'd like, introduce yourself. Tell me your name if you're comfortable with that. That way, if you pop into other live streams of mine and ours, hopefully I will remember you and I'll be able to address you as you please. Okay. It was in the woods around a town of less than 500 people. It was acceptable back then. Interesting. Very interesting. All right. Well, I definitely appreciate you sharing. Thank you for sharing. I'd love to hear more about that at some point. And I was not aware that this was still something that was widely occurring. And I love to hear about the more modern accounts and events, especially from lots of different vantage points. Let's see. I am whatever you wish me to be, my dear. All right, my friends. If no one has any other questions, I am going to need to say goodnight because I have a very hungry kitty in the next room meowing for her dinner, and I've yet to thaw that, to be honest. And I am, like my dear friend Tim, getting a little physically tired. So this is the last call for any questions. Sorry about the crooked frame. Any last questions? It was normal in the early 70s. Interesting. Deb, you are most welcome. Thank you very much for being here with me. I'm happy that you were able to make it. I know that you weren't able to make one of my other streams, so hopefully I was able to answer some of your questions and give you some information that you were looking for. I am excited to jump into another live stream with you guys again soon. My mouth, I mean, you can see my jaw is still honestly a little puffy. I had that dental work done recently. I have more to come, and I'm not looking forward to it. So yeah, I have wisdom teeth to be extracted here probably within the next month at most. I had to go in for a special deep cleaning to prepare for the final exam of my teeth before I have to go in for that final consultation. So right now I'm in such an awkward place. I'm sitting in between these appointments. I think within the next week I have my final examination in preparation for the surgery, and then I'll be scheduled with the oral surgeon for the removal. So I'm puffy, but I'm here, and I'm going to try to get in at least one more live stream, whether that's just me hanging out by the pool, doing our typical pool talk, or it's going to be me and Artemis together. I'm going to get something figured out for you guys, because this is awesome, and I love it. I'm so happy to be back. But yeah, oh yeah, in case you didn't know, originally I had advertised that Artemis would be joining Tim and I tonight, and typically this would be the case. Unfortunately, though, Artemis has some very serious family medical issues that have been taking both of us away from our passions and our jobs, you know. He couldn't make it tonight. Everything is fine with us. Everything is kosher, you could say, but he's got at least seemingly 2 family members that are preparing to depart, and there's a lot to work out there. And family's been in and out of town. We've been in and out of town. It's just been it's been a really tough time, you know. We were gonna go actually and be vendors at Contact in the Desert this year, and then I wound up being dismissed along with about 1,000 other of my colleagues from the specialty company that I was working for. So we had that working against us, but then it turned out that even if we had made it there, we wouldn't have been able to stay because of the family emergency that happened that even just, you know, began to take us away from everything that we were doing. And so it's just been a crazy summer ever since then. We're still getting everything figured out. I've got the new website redesign coming for you guys. I have more books that are in the wrap-up stages. I'm behind schedule on everything because I feel like I need to put my family first for this period of time. It's just a very tender time, you know, and then I've got my own health changes going on. There's just so much, you know what I mean? So, in case you missed it, that's where I've been. I've been doing a lot of deep healing and then family emergency stuff, and then just lots of behind the scenes stuff going on. Let me see. Absolutely. Oh, that's okay. Oh, welcome. I'm happy that you're here. I appreciate you being here. No, I still have a few people watching. It seems that everyone, however, has had all of their questions answered, and I'm happy that I could provide that. If you don't have any questions for me, my dear, then I will say good night. Um, if you are not, however, a follower on my Facebook, you might want to check me out on Facebook because I post a lot more over there right now, especially as I'm getting everything sorted out with slowly getting back into making video content. So that might be something for you to look into. It's the only official Tillie Treadwell account. I have a verified badge on that. Also, I will never ask you for money. I will never offer you custom readings or anything like that unless someone else brings that to my request first, just so that you're aware. I do have some scammers. I do have some people lately who have been impersonating me, and I guess that's how I know I've started to kind of make it big. So please ignore them or block them. It is a scam. You can only find me on Facebook under the official verified Tillie Treadwell page. And Intermediary Arts. I run that page too. That's linked on my Facebook. All right, cue the Jeopardy music. Last call for any questions. 30 seconds left to type them in. All right. right. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, my dears, I hope you have a magical morning. Or I'm sorry, I hope you have a merry morning or a magical midnight wherever you are. As you can tell, I'm tired and it is my bedtime. Talk to you soon.